Bonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Isn't this working? What the hell? Why is this not working? Why is this not working? Why is this not working? I don't know if anybody can hear me or not. I'm actually going to hang up and then reconnect. Okay, I'm going to assume that I'm on the air. My name is Jerome, and I am the Sane Environmentalist. Sorry for the weird Skypeage. I am still learning this software. Welcome, UCY TV listeners. I hope we are all having a very good day today. And I'm going to assume that I am live on the air. If I'm not, then I'm talking to myself, and I guess that's okay too. So at any rate, today I wanted to talk about some more things, generally speaking, dealing with the oceans. I wanted to talk about San Onofre. I wanted to talk about the direction that I would like my program on this network to go in. And I'm trying to get interviews. I'm trying to get a few people in here to do interviews with, but it's kind of hard contacting people when all you have is YouTube or something like that. But trust me, we're going to get some interviews going. I might even get lucky and get Arnie Gunderson on here. So today, I wanted to start out by talking about, kind of following up on yesterday's aquatic thing, talking about how sickly the oceans are. And I did a search for a map of red zones, for a map of dead zones, in the world. And it turns out that there's pretty much 3 of them right now. Pretty much the entire, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico at Mexico, where the Texas meets Mexico, all the way around, halfway down Florida, and then back up again, the whole entire East Coast, all dead zones. As well, there's a good-sized dead zone right up north, looks like south of Alaska. There's another one over a great large section of Europe, and, surprisingly enough, another one right off of Japan. Quite literally in the same direction as the current would bring the Fukushima radiation. So that is a tragedy. So the world's oceans are exploding with dead zones, regions where the water is so depleted of oxygen that fish and other sea life cannot even live. Dead zones are human-caused. They occur when crop fertilizers, things containing high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus get washed into rivers and streams and out into the ocean. Nutrient-rich farm runoff triggers huge algae blooms, and when the algae dies, it sinks to the bottom. Bacteria living in the water decompose the dead algae, and then they use up the oxygen, which the fish need. And the fish and the shellfish pretty much all just suffocate down there. They're saying that the dead zones have doubled each decade since the 60s, mostly due to agricultural pollution. And there's an area all around the Gulf of Mexico that is just dead. The whole state of Louisiana, probably 100 miles out, is a dead zone. Pretty much where the Mississippi River drains into the ocean is a big, giant dead zone. So that is a tragedy. There's no doubt about that. And I'm hoping that I'm on. Let me actually open up a page and go to the UCY website and see if I can get to the chat room. Because I'm scared that I'm not on and I'm talking to myself. And I do that a lot anyway, but I don't really want to do it when I'm supposed to be talking to other people. I guess if I hear my pretty voice, then I'll know that I'm on, huh? Do we get an echo? Hello? Yay, I'm on the air. Good, good. So good, I'm on the air. I was a little bit scared that I somehow wasn't, because Skype got stupid on me. I think it's a combination of Skype and a slow internet connection. So, yes, we've got giant dead zones. Jerome. I think it's funny. I am Lone Frog says, Jerome. I'm not Jewish, by the way. I'm actually agnostic. I'm more of a Taoist than anything. I follow I Ching, and quite a bit of times I am very agnostic. I do believe in God, but it's not a big thing. There we go. So it would be nice if I could also include some graphics with this, but I guess that's not possible. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing giant areas of the ocean, especially on the coasts of Europe, United States, East and South Coast, and Japan, that are all pretty much dead now. You know, and that leads me into the fact that we are not only in the water, but on land, facing a huge extinction crisis. You know, it's frightening, and it's true. Our planet is now in the midst of its sixth mass extinction of plants and animals, the sixth wave of extinction in the past 500 million years. We're currently experiencing the worst number of species die-off since the loss of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Although, generally, extinction is a natural phenomenon, it occurs at a natural background rate of about 1 in 5 species per year. And some scientists estimate we're now losing species at 1,000 to 10,000 times this background rate, with literally dozens going extinct every day, with as many as 30 to 50% of all species possibly being extinct by mid-century. That's 2050. That's 3 years from now. And unlike mass extinctions in the past, like that are caused by asteroids or natural cataclysms or volcanoes, the current crisis is almost entirely caused by humans. 99% of the current threatened species are at risk from human activities, primarily those driving habitat loss, introductions of exotic species, and global warming. Although I don't know about global warming. I think that they're basing global warming on predictions, not actual data. And we don't really have enough back data to know what the globe is really doing. So, for me, at least, the jury is out on global warming. I do see, however, if there was global warming, that it could cause extinction events, definitely. But if it's caused by an increase in carbon dioxide, well, the carbon dioxide would create a bloom of plants, which would basically feed the new species that would adapt and evolve and move into those areas that are able to do it. So, you know, I got to say that I have this theory, this carbon theory, that if you look at fossil evidence, you will see all the way up in North America, for instance, in northern Montana, you had giant dinosaurs, giant beasts, huge beasts that would require literally tons of biomass in order to live, which means to me that there was tons of biomass as far north as North Dakota in the United States and southern Canada. So when you think about it, that is a huge difference from what we have today, which is basically desert up there. You know, and it's cold. It's colder than heck. You're not going to grow tropical plants and have giant animals in Montana. What you got in Montana is fairly small creatures. It used to be buffalo, but buffalo are still fairly small creatures in the big picture compared to, let's say, elephant size. So I think that what happened is an asteroid impact 65 million years ago basically took all of the carbon, or most of it, let's say 2/3 of it, and by destroying all the life almost, the life equals carbon, and all the life basically got buried underground. And all the life that was buried underground turned into oil, coal, and natural gas. So all of the biomass that was on the surface in the form of plants and animals is now buried under the earth. And in a way, in a weird, twisted way, the only way that Earth could recover from this would be to get this carbon back into the ecosystem where plants can absorb it, plants feed animals, animals feed other animals, and there you have, after a while, you get into, with the warm enough climate, you get bigger and bigger animals. You know, and it used to be, we had barely an ice cap back in those days, almost no ice cap. Probably the North Pole completely melted during the summer months. So basically, all the carbon has gotten trapped, which has created a rather desert-like icebox environment on the Earth, which has killed off and made it impossible for huge creatures to exist anymore, except in areas around the equator. And when you think about it, around the equator, that's the only place that you're going to find huge animals because you have enough biomass to feed them down there. It's warm enough. So how is the Earth going to get its carbon back? How is it going to reintegrate this carbon back into the ecosystem? Well, we evolved, and we evolved specifically needing energy, specifically needing to create carbon dioxide in order just to survive. You know, telling the human race to stop producing carbon dioxide is literally a non-starter because we just cannot do it. We have to produce carbon dioxide. You know, everybody talks about, well, you can do solar and you can do wind and you can do nuclear, but, you know, solar, you know, think about what it takes to produce a solar panel, okay? Think of how many gallons of diesel fuel goes into the mining, processing, and extraction and manufacture of the minerals that go into a solar panel. You know, a lot. And solar panels don't last 100 years. They last a few years because the sun kills them after a while. So you're having to replace your solar panels. And so now you've got a giant solar panel industry which is dependent upon oil or natural gas or coal in order to help it and make it function. All the parts and pieces and metal frames, all the wires and inductors and conductors and regulators, all need oil in order for them to be produced. If we didn't have oil, the only way to produce them would be, well, you just couldn't. Same with the wind turbine. You know, think of the amount of energy it takes to create a wind turbine. And again, wind turbines don't last forever. And besides, wind turbines produce what is referred to as infrasound. You know, you guys do a web search for wind turbines and infrasound. infrasound. And sorry, barky dog. But infrasound is super, super low frequency sound. And these 250 whatever foot long blades on these wind turbines create super, super low frequency sound waves, and they are making the people that live nearby ill in various different ways. You know, they're having mental health issues, they're having issues with their immune systems and their nervous systems and skin conditions and all kinds of issues. You know, so I cannot really support on a massive scale wind. I don't think wind is the way to do it unless we can come up with a way to make wind work in a way that doesn't create this infrasound. You know, maybe a big rotary sort of a thing versus a fan. I don't know. But so there you have it. You know, it takes tons of energy to create the things that would create alternative energy sources. You know, the whole idea that, well, we're going to switch to solar, then we won't have to burn any more oil is really, literally, a crock of horse dung. You know, because you do need to replace solar panels. They don't last for more than, let's say, 10 years. They lose efficiency. You know, as particles, gamma, etc., come in and bombard them, they lose their ability to function. And so they have to be replaced, and that's not a problem. And maybe there's an overall increase because of that in the amount of green energy versus the amount of oil-based energy. But bottom line is, that is not ever going to happen. We do not have the ability to do anything about it. Oh my God, these dogs. So those are my brother's dogs, and he takes them on the golf cart to go get the mail every day, and the dogs are like, whoop, whoop, whoop. They're just so excited and happy to be going on the golf cart that they just bark, and they're pretty wonderful animals overall. I love them, but they can have a tendency to be rather loud. Both of them border collies. So I'm losing my web pages here. That kind of sucks. So at any rate, I believe that the Earth has evolved humans specifically to extract the carbon out of the Earth. Again, it's literally the only way that it could happen. You had to evolve a critter which would literally dig down into the ground and pull this stuff back up again. So that's us. That's our job, you know. And so that's my theory on why humans need oil and why I feel that oil is an important thing. It's unfortunate that we are kind of stuck with the radioactive side effects of the oil, which I find really, really sad. But, you know, what can you do? What can you do? Apparently we are going to be pulling radioactivity out of the ground by our energy needs no matter what we do. There's no way around it. And once we do, what are you going to do with this stuff? Well, I'll tell you what they're doing with it at the Fukushima site. They've got their incinerator running now. It's been running for over a year now. And I was looking at Google Earth, and I saw few incinerators up and down that area of the coast, and they're spewing huge amounts of smoke. And so a facility in Fukushima for incinerating miscellaneous solid low-level waste has begun operating, and it will be used for disposal of items such as used protective clothing and construction waste. The miscellaneous solid waste incineration facility is what they're calling it. Houses 2 incineration lines, each composed of a rotary kiln incineration system and a series of exhaust filters. The 2 lines share a common stack. Ash generated will be stored in sealed drums for final disposal. No word on what that final disposal is. And as I said yesterday, you take low-level waste, like dirty garments and shoes and gloves and masks and whatnot, and they say, well, it's a low-level waste. Well, and it is. But what happens is when you burn it, you concentrate that low-level waste because the mass goes away, it gets burnt up, right? But the radionuclides don't. They filter those out. And so what you end up is with ash, which is highly radioactive, and filters on the stacks, which are super highly radioactive. You know, they catch all that stuff. Don't think that they're not, what are they going to do with it? Oh, euphemistically, they refer to final disposal. You know, is final disposal ever going to happen? I don't think so. You know, I don't think that we have the ability to do anything about that. I don't think we have the ability to do anything to fix that situation. You know, and that's going to create issues. You know, all of this waste, all of this pollution is going to create issues. For instance, near Hanford, and I don't know if I can pronounce this word correctly, but I think it's anencephaly. Birth defects near Hanford skyrocket by 3,000%. Anencephaly is one of the most terrifying and deadly of all human birth defects. Disorder occurs during the embryonic stage and results in infants being born lacking major portions of their brain. Very few children born with this survive more than a few hours or days. Fortunately, it's quite rare, though, except for those living in a 3-county area in the central part of the state of Washington, where the rate of children born with this disorder is more than 2,500% above the national average. And despite efforts of the authorities to cover up the link, it seems obvious to even the most casual observer that the high incidences of birth defects could be somehow connected to the Hanford nuclear facility, which is located in the vicinity where the cases are occurring. The Hanford Reservation is considered to be the most contaminated nuclear site in the Western Hemisphere and the focus of the world's biggest environmental cleanup effort. And now recently we had the tunnel collapse. Everybody knows about that, where you have those train cars full of waste. And I did a video, actually a couple different videos about that. If you guys want to go to my YouTube channel, you'll find it there. And I was wondering, well, how are they going to fix this? Well, what they decided to do is take the tunnels and inject them with some sort of a grout mixture. And this grout, they're going to just literally fill the entire tunnel full of grout, seal it and the train cars in this big blob of grout, starting at one end and coming on back to the other. Well, apparently they had some issues where all of a sudden they've got workers with contamination on them. Well, there's a surprise. And so they had to shut down the grouting operation. So there again, it's so nasty you can't get close enough to do anything with it. And it will not become unnasty for a very, very, very long time. So, you know, what are we going to do about that? You know? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about the collapses? Oh, as well, now they were tearing down part of the plutonium extraction processing plant, Purex, I think they called it. Plutonium uranium enrichment extraction plant. And they had all the radiation detectors went off. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, now you can't do that. You know, we're basically stuck. We're stuck with this stuff, and it's not going to go away. So, and by the way, I don't know if anybody knows how to call into the show. I think the call-in number is 1-718-717-8296. But if you call in, I'd love to talk to you. You know, as well, you can email me at hebertjerome@gmail.com. You know, I'm always open to suggestions and comments. I even like the Jew-Rome one. That's kind of funny, actually. There's always somebody out there that's got to say something about Jews. I don't get it, but it's funny to me, you know. So, you know, that is what it is. I am not at all upset about it. Next, what do we got? We're at 8:31. That was a Hanford. Now let's move on to Sane Environmentalist. Okay. I saw a frightening video with Arnie Gunderson today, who is, I think, one of the nuclear heroes in the world. He is a super strong person. His voice is loud. His knowledge is solid. He is a nuclear engineer. He is one of the people that actually helped to develop the General Electric Mark I boiling water reactor. And I'm sure he is sad that he did that. But basically, the thing that shut down Sane Environmentalist was a ruptured steam generator tube. And picture an area about 13 feet across, circular, and put, I think it was about 15,000 pipes in a loop from one end to the other, from one side to the other. 15,000 pipes, each one about an inch long. Okay, you run steam directly from the reactor through these pipes, which heats the pipes, and you run water through the cavity that the pipes are in. And that water boils, creates steam, which runs the turbine. Everything under super high pressure. Well, they had to replace the pipes in one of their reactors, and they had Fuji Heavy Industries do the new replacement parts. You know, and I used to love Fuji Heavy Industries because they were Subaru back in the day. Back in 1979, 1980, when a Subaru would run 400,000 miles, or everything else is dying in 70. All the bearings are heavier. It was a more solid built Japanese vehicle. Well, apparently they've gone downhill because their steam generator that they created vibrated. They removed a critical buffer in the very bottom, which would stop vibration. And all that hot radioactive steam is going through these tubes at super high speeds, and it creates a resonance which vibrates the tubes, and they bang together. And when they bang together, the walls of the tubes thin and fail. And when that happens, well, then you have a ruptured tube, which will, in the end, lead to a radioactive release, and the actual steam pressure from the ruptured tube can cause ruptures and cuts in other tubes nearby. So you can have a cascading failure. Okay, and this is what I'm talking about, where they're talking with their gravity-fed new system that's so safe. Well, they're probably using a similar design on the heat exchanger that goes from the reactor to their emergency cooling pool. And who's to say that they're not going to have Fuji Heavy Industries manufacture the steam piping, you know, the heat exchanger, you know, and if that fails, then what? You know, if you shut down your reactor in an emergency, and okay, we got 72 hours, but after 24, all of a sudden you start getting massive ruptures in your steam tubes, because it's an overpressure situation or the reactor's running extra hot, then you're basically going to end up with just what I said you would end up with, which is a total loss of containment. And you're going to have a boiling pool of highly radioactive water, which they claim they can refill easily, but if you can't get anybody close to it, you can't refill anything, can you? So I'm going to take a 30-second break because coffee. All right, thank you for waiting. Yeah, when you drink an entire pot of coffee, it has a tendency to make you, have to use the restroom. So, what I recommend molten salt reactors. I'm going to look that up right now. There we go. Now, molten salt reactors are a whole different thing. It doesn't use pressurized water on the nuclear end. It uses liquid fluoride salt solutions on the reactor end. And so the reactor and the core are basically a giant bath of molten salts. And on the other side, there's no way that you could get a steam tube rupture because it's molten salt flowing through the steam tubes. And if you did get a steam tube rupture, it would be salt going into the water instead of steam going into the water. So the salt's not going to bubble to the surface and enter the atmosphere. You can immediately shut down the reactor and drain it, because you can drain the entire core within minutes by turning off the Freon to the freeze plug. So a molten salt reactor is a type of nuclear reactor that uses a liquid fuel instead of a solid fuel rods, like they do in a conventional reactor. Though using a liquid fuel provides many advantages in safety and simplicity of design. Unlike conventional reactors, the rate of fission in a molten salt reactor is inherently stable. Nonetheless, should the fuel salt become too hot to operate safely, a freeze plug made of salts kept solid by a cooling fan below the reactor will melt, and the liquid content of the reactor will flow into an emergency dump tank where it cannot continue to fission, and it can cool safely. And the thing about this molten salt is, as soon as it stops reacting, it cools very quickly to where the ambient outside temperature is, and it won't continue to create decay heat. There's no decay heat. As in a fuel rod, you can shut down a fuel rod pretty quick, but it will continue to react even with decay heat, because it's the metals within and the elements within which are being created and destroyed will continue to be created and destroyed, and you'll have a massive amount of heat from all that destruction. So the control rods at the top of the reactor provide further control and a rate of fissioning by absorbing neutrons that might otherwise cause fission reactions. They did a test in the 60s showing that this kind of reactor can run safely without operator intervention, even after intentional removal of a control rod during full operation. The fuel salt is circulated through a heat exchanger where it is cooled by another molten salt loop that is free of radioactive fuel and fission products, so there's no water involved. It's all salt. The heat from the second loop can then be used to do work such as heating water to turn a steam generator. As well, MSRs, or molten salt reactors, are walk-away safe. They cannot melt down as can a conventional reactor because they're molten by design. An operator cannot even force one of these things to overheat. If for some reason one of them were to overheat and the heat would melt the freeze plug, and boom, all the salts would drain into an emergency cooling tank where it would cool and solidify. No operator interaction, nor even emergency backup power is needed if this were to happen. So in the event of an off-grid situation, and let's say you couldn't reinsert your control rods, and it somehow, they say it still won't get any hotter than it can get, and it got overheated, the freeze plug would melt and everything would dump into the tank down below, where you no longer have your neutron moderator. They use a graphite grid in the core, and the graphite grid moderates the neutrons or slows down the neutrons so that they can interact with other atoms, creating fissions. It actually fissions in a safe way plutonium and turns plutonium into its decay products. The fuel salts work at normal atmospheric pressure, so a breach in the reactor containment would simply leak out the fuel, which would then solidify as it cooled. But if you compare that to a breach in a conventional reactor, that leads to highly pressurized and radioactive water coolant spewing into the atmosphere, potentially leaking into surrounding bodies of water. As well, a molten salt reactor, the leak would have a tendency to self-heal, because you know how salt will cool and harden on the outside, and then it will create its own plug. And there's no pressure, it's just the pressure of the liquid inside the vessel. Radioactive byproducts like fission like iodine-131, cesium-134, and 137, such as those released by the Fukushima meltdown, are physically bound to the hardened coolant and do not leave the reactor site. Conventional reactors use solid ceramic fuel rods containing enriched uranium to fission uranium, and the fuel releases gases such as xenon, which causes these fuel rods to crack. This cracking makes it necessary to remove and replace the fuel rods well before the actinides, such as uranium, have fission. That is why nuclear waste is radioactive for a very long time. However, the actinides that remain in the cracked fuel rod is still an excellent source of fuel for reactors. France, for example, recycles the waste instead of burying it, so that these actinides can be placed in new fuel rods to make more electricity. Because the molten salt reactor uses liquid fuel, to release the gases simply bubbles up, typically in an off-gas unit in the coolant loop, where it can be removed. Since the liquid is unaffected by releases of gases, the fuel can be left in the reactor until almost all of the actinides are finished, leaving only elements that are radioactive for a relatively 300 years or less short period of time. The result is that the molten salt reactors have no long-term issue with regard to nuclear waste. Somebody yesterday commented that half-life means that half of the material remains, and I agree with that. That is what a half-life is. But if you look at my analogy to that, you could understand that you can look at it as, okay, let's say standing 10 feet away from something with a given amount of plutonium or any other radioactive substance would cause sickness or death within an X period of time. once you reach the half-life of that product, given that there is now half of as much of that radiation, well, then it's going to take twice as long. So you basically can look at it either as, I think that gives it a more realistic picture. Like you said, 300 years or less, people are like, oh, that's not long. Well, that's for half of it, and then you've got to go another 300 years for the next half of it, and so it takes, so you start out with 10 feet 1 hour to be sickened, and in 300 years now it's 10 feet 2 hours to be sickened, and then another 300 years it's 10 feet 4 hours to be sickened. So now we're up to 900 years. If you go to 1200 years, 10 feet 18 hours to be sickened. So you see, it is exponential, but it is true that this is another way to look at half-life, which maybe will make it a little more real for people. I think a lot of times people assume that, well, once its half-life is reached, it's pretty much safe. That's kind of the image that the nuclear industry tries to put forth. Like, well, half-life, it's like, no, they should say how long until it is gone. And then the numbers would be giant, and then that would really freak people out. And we can't have people freaking out now, can we? No. We want them to think that somehow this is safe. So the reason that conventional reactors can't use up all the actinides in their fuel rods is that the neutrons in a conventional reactor only move fast enough to cause enriched uranium to fission. Fissioning most of all the actinides also requires much faster moving neutrons, and these can be achieved in both molten salt reactor and solid fuel breeder reactors such as GE Hitachi's PRISM. So that's the direction we could go, and you could take a molten salt reactor and make it very small. I wouldn't say household size, but city size. You could make one that would power a city, and or a small town, let's say, that's off grid, or a village even, and if you had a way to safely. And there again, there's the issue is that you will have this waste, and it will be deadly for over 1,000 years. So what do you do with it? What's the difference between a block of salt and a fuel rod? They're both nasty. They're, I imagine you might be able to somehow dissolve and inject a molten salt deep under the earth somewhere, but it's still going to end up coming back up. There's just no way to do that, and Yucca Mountain, that's not going to happen. They're trying hard. The government is still doing their thing. They're acting like it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen. People of Nevada are not going for that. They're just not going for it, and they're trying to get permitted for it right now, but I don't think it's going to happen. But we need to do something. We need to figure out something. And I don't know exactly what we can do. But Yucca Mountain is short-sighted. Was for police. According to Wikipedia, the project was approved in 2002, but federal funding for the site ended in 2011 under Obama via the amendment to the Department of Defense Full Year Continuing Appropriations Act. Project has had many difficulties and was highly contested by the non-local public, the Western Shoshone people, and many politicians. The Government Accountability Office stated that the closure was for political, not safety or technical reasons. But what I've heard is that the geology is an issue. The formation that makes up Yucca Mountain was created by several large eruptions from a caldera volcano and is composed of altering layers of welded tuff and non-welded tuff and semi-welded tuff. The tuff surrounding the burial site is expected to protect human health as it provides a natural barrier to the radiation. It lies along the transition between the Mojave and the Great Basin deserts. The volcanic tuff at Yucca Mountain is appreciably fractured, and movement of water through the aquifer below the waste is primarily through fractures. While fractures are usually confined to individual layers, the faults extend from the planned storage area all the way to the water table, 600 to 1,500 feet below the surface. Future water transport to the surface to waste containers is likely to be dominated by fractures. There's evidence that the surface water has been transported down through the 700 foot of overburden to the exploratory tunnel at Yucca Mountain in less than 50 years. So groundwater will get in. Some of the proponents assert that the predicted containment failure of the waste containers, these cracks, may provide a route for movement of radioactive waste that dissolves in the water flowing downward from the desert surface. Officials state that the waste containers will be stored in such a way as to minimize or even nearly eliminate this possibility. So, what material exists that will last for 1,000,000 years, not leak, and not rupture, and not be degraded by the Wigner effect, which is basically the effect of radiation on materials. It destroys materials. What material exists that will last for 1,000,000 years? Maybe some kind of ceramic or glass or whatever it is. If we could come up with it, it would be very, very expensive and very hard to get a hold of, and probably in its own way be destructive to the environment. So I think the Swedish have found a place that is completely geologically stable, like 10,000 feet below the ground, in a solid granite place that it just doesn't have any faults or anything near it. It is geologically stable, and that's where they're going to put their spent fuel rods. But there again, our spent fuel rods, I would say that if we switch to all molten salt technology right now, within the next 30 years or 40 years, we could eliminate all of the spent fuel rods and bundles that we have, as well as any extra stockpiles of uranium or plutonium that we have. We could literally use that as the fuel in these molten salt reactors, and it would eat them alive. And then you would end up with the 1,200-year-ish product versus a 1,000,000-year product. Now, 1,000 years or even 2,000 years, those are numbers that are somewhat realistic as far as being able to store something for that long. You can't do it for 1,000,000. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. There's no way that you can make that work. Also, Nevada ranks 4th in the nation for current seismic activity. Earthquake databases provide current and historic earthquake information. Analysis of the available data in 1996 indicates that since 1976, there have been 621 seismic events of magnitude greater than 2.5 within a 50-mile radius of Yucca Mountain. The Department of Energy stated that the psychic and tectonic effects on the natural systems will not significantly affect repository performance. Did they now? Yucca Mountain lies in a region of ongoing tectonic deformation, and the deformation rates are too slow to significantly affect the mountain during the 10,000-year regulatory compliance period. 10,000 years. Okay. So what the Department of Energy is doing is they're coming up with a 10,000-year solution for a million-year problem. How is it? What did they figure? Within 10,000 years we're going to be leaving the planet or something? Or all people would be dead? Or what happens after 10,000 years? By then we'll have figured out something else? That's just terrible, you know. Rises in water table caused by seismic activity could be, at most, according to them, a few tens of meters and would not reach the repository. The fractured and vaulted volcanic tuff that the Yucca Mountain comprises reflects the occurrence of many earthquake faulting and strong ground motion events during the last several million years. And the hydrologic characteristics of the rock would not be changed significantly by seismic events that occur in the next 10,000 years. The engineered barrier system components will provide substantial protection of the waste from seepage of water even under severe seismic loading. That's what they say. In September 2007, it was discovered that the Bow Ridge fault line ran underneath the facility hundreds of feet east of where it was originally thought to be located, beneath a storage pad where spent radioactive fuel canisters would be cooled before being sealed in the maze of tunnels. The discovery required several structures to be moved several hundred feet further to the east and drew criticism from Robert R. Lukes, the head of the Nevada Agency for Nuclear Project, who argues that Yucca Mountain administrators should have known about the fault's location in years prior. He called for the movement of the structures just-in-time engineering. So they're doing just-in-time engineering on a quote-unquote 10,000-year regulatory compliance period. Just really bad. It's really terrible. Absolutely disgusting. So we're coming to the end of the show. Somehow I made it through another hour. I was woefully unprepared, but I think I managed to finagle my way through somehow. Please leave me feedback in the chat, and as well, go to my YouTube channel and leave me feedback there, or you can email me at hebertjerome@gmail.com. I'm always love to get new messages from people, and that's I love it. So my name is Jerome. I am the Sane Environmentalist. I hope all of you enjoyed this hour. Look forward to some interviews with some interesting people. And remember to keep it real and be active. Be active. You know, if we don't do something about it, nobody will. So I'm kind of not sure what time. There it goes. I'll see you guys next Thursday.